ourselves not to pee. The poor girl must have thought we'd been released from the zoo. I guess we had. In the church, I felt really angry when all the people came to shake our hands. This was the morning before the day of the funeral. We were sitting in the front row. We'd never seen these people when she was alive. I was angry they hadn't helped us, or her. I didn't know who half of them were, and the ones I knew made me feel angrier. They had known. Not the details, but they'd known, and they hadn't done a thing, but came now to shake our hands and tell us how sorry they were for our loss. I was tempted to ask which loss in particular, but I didn't want to upset my big brother Joe any more than he was already. We've more chance of actually raising our mother from the dead some Easter Sunday than ever getting back what we really lost, which is ourselves, years before now. I screamed at God in the sky last night, called him all the cruel bastards under the sun until I puked. It hurt real bad to say hateful things to him. It's not the first time I've done it. His answers are always silent. It took me a while to come to grips with that. I got annoyed in the early days. I thought the silence meant he didn't care. So I'd scream more until I was all screamed out and could only be silent myself. I thought you were supposed to hear his voice like in all the stories. I found out the fact is he can't speak because he's crying so much himself. Who can speak when they're weeping? In the funeral home, my father cried over my mother's body, said, "I'm sorry, Mary," over and over. That made me angry too. Why sorry now and not before? Why no I'm sorry from either of them to the four of us? Why conduct a war and then say sorry when someone is dead? I ran away out of the funeral home, down the road through Glasstool and into Dunleary. I don't think I'll ever stop running. I don't know how I'll ever not be angry. Nothing is ever going to be fixed now. The next day, as we were waiting in my father's sitting room for the funeral cars, I decided to smoke myself to death. Decided that I would smoke and smoke all my life, as many cigarettes as it took to send me to my mother. I can't remember anything from the funeral but feet around the grave. I looked down. We all did, crying. Sisters. My sister, Emer, is barely 14 months older than me, but she's always been a mother as well as a sister to me. We shared the same bed growing up. We had an imaginary line down the middle, and God help whichever one of us crossed the line accidentally or on purpose, we'd be kicking the crap out of each other. We did a lot of that, like a pair of boys. But if the shit hit the fan, Emer would instantly switch into mother mode. For example, one Christmas morning at my father's house, where we shared a room with 2 single beds in it, she and I had a fight, and she stomped on my chocolate Santa, so I quite rightly gave her an unmerciful kick in the butt and ran for the door, her chasing after me. Only I twisted my ankle before I escaped and fell screaming in pain. And in a millisecond, Emer was all like, "Oh my God, are you okay?" And down on the floor beside me, argument forgotten. She loves me. I don't know why, but she does. For one reason, and one reason alone, it was hell sharing that bedroom in my father's house with her. She was in love with Barry Manilow, so her side of the room was papered with massive posters of him, while mine was all Susie and the Banshees. Each of us woke in hell, I would imagine, if my posters scared her in the night as much as her talking about Manilow in romantic terms scared me. Previously, she'd been in love with Daniel Boone. Now that I could understand, but not Manilow. But then, she and I, thank God, have never liked the same kind of men. I like punks and bad boys. She likes boring good boys. She never got in trouble with our father, which really pissed me off. I was always in trouble. Sometimes I called my father pretending to be Emer because he couldn't tell the difference between our voices, and I'd get to find out what consequences were in store for Sinead when she got home. We still love smashing chocolate because of the Santa episode. So every year at Christmas, we stomp on a couple of chocolate Santas. And at Easter, we smash up beautiful chocolate chickens with a hammer. We started that tradition when she was going through a breakup. She was crying in my kitchen and it was Easter. And well, someone had given someone a chocolate chicken in a basket, so I just handed her a hammer. She laughed through her tears while beating the thing to smithereens. Though Emer never got in trouble, it's not like she wasn't up to mischief, it's just she never got caught like me. At school, she was a prefect, made life hell for me and my little gang, who were all the bad girls. She'd be chasing us, and I would stop and make a square shape with my hand. Calling her a square used to drive her crazy. But she is square compared to me, and I'm jealous. I secretly long to be square. It ain't comfy being squoval. Today, she is a doctor of art history, very smart, and she doesn't suffer fools for 1 minute. She had a store years ago in which she sold her own paintings, which were gorgeous. She put the door on the store by herself. Huge door. And she managed to screw in all the hinges. And she's half the weight of myself. She always thinks she's fat, but she ain't at all. How she's different from me is that she has red hair and self-esteem. I don't have either. She makes me say affirmations. I am loving, I am lovable, I love and accept myself, etc. in the mirror. It doesn't work, but being around her makes me like myself better because she likes me, and she doesn't like anyone who doesn't like me. She has no mental illness. She's never been a pain in the arse. She isn't difficult or too emotional like I am. She isn't vengeful like me. She has no mean streak. She can walk away from abuse without becoming abusive. I wish I were like her in those ways. Lord knows I'm working on it. Not long ago, she came to visit me in the hospital. She held my hand and walked me through the garden of the hospital saying, I love you. Suddenly it felt like we were little kids again. We had tramped the streets of Dublin together as children. Moore Street, Parnell Street. We'd go to the Kingfisher chip shop with money we'd begged from strangers by telling them we needed to buy a bus ticket home. Fact is, we were doing everything we could to avoid home. This is when we lived with our mother. We did anything to stay out because only battering would happen at home. Some nights we just rode the bus from the first stop to the last and back in the hope that mother would be asleep when we got home. We were a strange mixture, middle-class kids with filthy clothes that had not been washed for years, begging. We were good at begging. We had to be or we would have starved. In summer, when all the kids were happy going home, we hid our field hockey sticks at school and cried. We knew we were in for weeks of violence. The other kids expected weeks of joy, their mothers smiling. Ours was frothing at the mouth. No rescuer in sight, no respite, only the certainty of doom. Any dream will do. My brother Joseph and I have a similar relationship as my father and I do, in that we get along only when discussing music. Rest of the time, my brother doesn't like me, because I'm a pain in the ass and too emotional. But when we were growing up, he was my hero. I used to walk around carrying his empty guitar case so I'd look cool like him. Though he went through a phase of wanting to be a priest, he wisely became a writer instead, and wrote, in fact, one of my 2 favourite novels of all time, Redemption Falls. My second favourite is Mistaken by Neil Jordan. I've probably spent a total of an hour with Joe since I was 18 and our mother died. It is hard for children of abuse to be around each other, triggers and reminders. Plus I lost my shit with him maybe once too often. Plus he lost his shit with me once too often. We are bad-tempered, the O'Connors. It's sad, really. We didn't get set an example of blood being thicker than water. I'm sure in our veins there's not blood, but water. Joe plays guitar. He says he doesn't play well, but he does. My sister plays harp, and my younger brother plays drums. I always thought it would be brilliant to make one album together and call it Fuck the Chorus, but the fights would have made Liam and Noel Gallagher seem like pussycats. He's funny, my brother Joe. Pants pissingly funny. I miss him very much, and I feel shit about myself because we are so distant. But he is still my hero, and I love him to my soul. John, I love you. My little brother John is 2 years younger than me. My mother gave him a very hard time. The nights I heard him scream for mercy at her command and couldn't rescue him have vastly contributed to my activism and my anger management problem. I couldn't save him. I couldn't protect him. I couldn't even move a muscle to get myself from my room to his. I've been angry at my mother all my life, but I displaced it. I couldn't admit it was her I was angry at, so I took it out on the world and burned nearly every bridge I ever crossed. If I could go back in time and flatten my mother or have her arrested, I would, but I can't. Neither myself nor John came out of what happened to us quite as well adjusted as my older siblings. We didn't get the same self-esteem lessons that Joe and Emer had. All we got were the lessons from our mother about what a ruination of her life we were. She humiliated John in front of us and humiliated us in front of him. Many's the time I confessed to doing something I hadn't done so that she wouldn't beat John for it. I'd take the beating instead. I know Emer feels the same way about me. Not being able to rescue me hurt her, just as not being able to rescue John hurt me. Once when we were teenagers, John and I went to the cinema to see the horror movie Halloween. The murderer was wearing a white hockey goaltender mask. Afterwards, John chased me all the way up O'Connell Street with his white motorbike helmet on backward. How he didn't bash into anything I'll never know. He scared the bejesus out of me. Once I bit his nose during a pretend fight. The clever fucker snotted it into my mouth. We really are a very messed up family. We don't even suit that word, family. It should be a comforting word, but it's not. It's a painful, stabbing word. Cuts the heart into pieces, and all the more because it's too late to go back and do anything differently. About my dad. I tried to score some hash when I was about 15, but it never turned up. Largely because the dude I gave the $5 to died. And no, it wasn't my father who killed him. The dude was an associate of my stepsister, and my father knew he was up to no good. Dude was lurking on the path outside my father's front garden one night, peering over the hedge, waiting for my stepsister to come out. My father spied him and lured him into the garden with talk of, "Oh, she'll be out in a minute, come on in," and then knocked him flat out on the grass with one punch to the side of his head. He was tall and lanky. My father is 5'4" like me. Dude had the utter gormlessness. This is an Anglo-Irish word for stupidity of the sort that would have Bill Clinton in the Oval Office with a cigar and Monica Lewinsky. To come back another night, believing my father to be out. At the time, my little brother was young enough to have a tricycle. It was sitting in the tiny red tiled porch outside the front door. Soon as my father spotted the dude, he grabbed the tricycle, ran with it to the gate, hopped onto it, and chased the guy down the road, his knees nearly hitting his face with each push of the pedals. Poor dude ran for dear life for miles, looking over his shoulder every few seconds with such an expression of sheer horror you'd think Freddy Krueger was after him. When my big brother was little, a dog was bothering him at school every morning. After a few weeks of no change in the situation, my father went in with my brother to locate the dog. Dog starts snarling at Joe. My father gives it one Francis Street kick. Dog never went near Joe again. You do not want to mess with my father. I'm like him, I guess. At school once, when me and my sister were about 5 and 6, respectively, we cornered a poor girl who had dared to state that her father was better looking than ours. Now, since our father was the handsomest man on earth, we weren't having her nonsense, so we made her take it back. Not that we were going to hurt her, and we didn't make any specific threat or anything. We just declared our absolute rejection of her assessment of the situation, and then towered over her silently until she recanted. We proudly informed our father later that his honour and reputation had been defended. I ought to mention, if I have not already, my father's impressive and inspiring humility, of which I hope to have at least one drop. At 82, he's retired, of course, from his occupation as a construction engineer, but he still lifts me up when I'm down. He makes me feel tall again when I feel small. I love him very much, and I regret all the years I didn't speak with him because I was young and stupid. I would advise any young person not to do what I did. Time passes quickly, and you can't get it back. But we are with each other now, and that is the greater blessing of both our lives. Poem from my youth. The child who has been speaking isn't speaking now. If you dance with me, I'll let you fall asleep. Further, when you sleep with me, you don't need dreams. If you don't know who to be, you can be me. I am the one whose hand she took, but I don't like labels. Some call me music, some the great absolver. I sat with her when she thought I was a cloudy spirit. I took her for myself because I love her. Why? A sensitive girl. We don't want to lose her. Rarely has somebody got faith like her. She asked for help and I did overhear her say, I only want to disappear. I put my hands about her little waist. Dark blue and green and red sparkles my face. I flung her and I spun her round the place. I shone upon her and she vanished into space. Part 2. Who are you? Best day of my life was the day I first left Ireland, and any other day I left Ireland was the next best. Happened to be someone up there likes me, so in 1985, a fortnight or so after we buried my mother, don't worry, we made sure she was dead first, Ensign Records got in touch with me via a guy named Kieran Owens, whom I had met while singing with Tonton McCoot, a band I had joined the previous summer. It was named after the Haitian Secret Police, a terrible name chosen by the band leader and bass player Colm Farrelly, who fancied himself something of a witch. I had put an advert in Hot Press, Ireland's only music magazine, saying I was a singer looking for a band. I tramped about the suburbs of Dublin, auditioning in people's garages and sitting rooms, settling finally on Tonton because it didn't seem likely to be a square situation, musically speaking, where the others had, Colm's utter madness being the deciding factor. He had also agreed we could do some of my songs, while the other bands had not. The other bands would have had me singing Summertime for the rest of my life, and I'd rather have poked my own eyes out. Tonton lasted about a year. The big shot record executive Nigel Grange and Chris Hill of Ensign were inclined to scout Ireland for acts because they'd had the Boomtown Rats and Thin Lizzy. Kieran Owens was one of their go-to guys for advice on what was hot or not around town. He had taken them to a gig of ours 6 months previously. Now they'd tracked me down, though, through Kieran and called me. Said they wanted me to come to London and make some demos with Carl Wallinger from the Waterboys, and asked how soon could I do so. They said they didn't want a band, just me, which suited me fine because we had some weeks previously discovered that Colm had been squirreling away any money we earned for himself, and so the band had broken up. I jumped on a plane within 48 hours of Ensign calling me, with the help of £100 kindly offered to me by the lovely boss of the restaurant where I was working, the Badass Cafe in Dublin, where myself and all the other waitresses wore white t-shirts that said, "Nice pizza ass." I kid you not, I actually didn't realise what it meant until I was about 28. I demoed 4 songs with Carl, 3 of which eventually made it onto my first album, The Lion and the Cobra. The first was a song called Drink Before the War, which I'd written the previous year about my constipated headmaster who hated me making music and campaigned for my father not to let me take my guitar with me back to boarding school, despite the fact that all I could do was make music. I used to smoke right outside his gate to try to get expelled as a protest against his protest against my music making. It never worked. One morning he bowled me out in front of the whole assembly at school. He was an unmerciful snob. "If you're going to make music," he whined down his pompous nose, "you're going to spend the rest of your life going in the back door," pronouncing the last 2 words as if their literal meaning was dog shit. He didn't know going in the back door was the whole point. To him, fun was public enemy number 1. There was a reason he was so angry. One of my teachers, a glorious black-bearded, music-loving man by the name of Joe Falvey, had a friend who had a recording studio in Cork, which was quite a drive from Waterford where our school was. Me and my friend Jeremy had been busking with our guitars around Waterford and earned ourselves quite the reputation. So several times Mr. Falvey drove us to Cork, where we recorded all night and then sneaked back to school. And we'd all got caught. Me and Jeremy had been busking on the weekends and after school too. There was even a pub where we'd started doing gigs, so we weren't at all concentrating on our studies. We couldn't have given a toss. Neither could Mr. Falvey. But the headmaster wasn't having it. We were bringing the school into rock and roll disrepute. One Friday morning, after a few weeks of failing to get expelled, I woke and realised the first class of that day was double home economics. I didn't want to be a housewife, didn't like what I'd seen of it, I hated cooking, and besides, I wanted to sleep with more than one man. I asked my friend Hugh to help me get the train back to Dublin that morning. I can't remember if he drove or how we got to the station, but he helped me get my stuff together and put me on the train. I went to Colum's house. He was older than the rest of us in Tonton-Macoute, but he lived with his old mother. I stayed with him a few nights and got some money from him to rent a room at a place in Dublin called Dolphin's Barn. I didn't contact my father for about a week. When I did, he took it well. He realised I'd made my mind up and I'd gotten a job as well as joined a band. He was clever. He gave me £200 a month, which was exactly enough to pay my rent and no more. So I couldn't sit on my ass and not work if I wanted to eat or pay my bills. Not that I would have anyway, but it was really clever. There was a bricklayer, a huge guy living in the room above me. I had to borrow 20 quid from him once. When I was late paying him back, he broke into my room while I was out and stole all my stuff, including a flute my friend Barbara had given me. I moved. All the band did was rehearse all day, every day, apart from work hours, and all night too at the few pub gigs or talent contests we'd do. We had a space up top of an old building on Crown Alley, and the place I worked was on the same street. All the pizza I could eat and all the chefs I could seduce, and then all the singing I could do. I also got a job as a kissogram girl. 25 quid was what some idiot would pay for me to turn up in a French maid outfit, say a stupid poem in a dreadful French accent, and place a pair of French frilly knickers on some poor dude's head. It being Ireland, of course, there was no actual kissing, despite the job title. I got paid £6 out of the 25. My friend Barbara, who gave me the flute that was later stolen, was married to Steve Wickham, a violin player with Intua Nua and the Waterboys. She asked me one day if she too could be a kissogram girl because she was a bit bored. She was an American from Atlanta, so she was braver than me and she was gorgeous and outgoing and blonde. The dude who ran the company, which was called Hot Lips, took full advantage and had her wear a bikini with balloons that the guys could bite, tied around the bra and knickers. I was slightly envious, but then I would get to wear my favourite outfit, which was the naughty nun, a full habit from head to toe at the front, but nothing at the back from the waist down, only fishnet stockings and stilettos. It felt so wrong, but it felt so right. I was the worst kissogram girl who ever lived, I reckon. I was very shy, and the poems composed by the dude who ran the company were embarrassingly bad. I would shake reading them and run as soon as they were uttered. The dude who ran the company also did gorillograms and Tarzans for the ladies. He lived in what seemed to be a former boys' home run by priests. The house was now inhabited by one elderly priest and several young men. There was a large statue of a pale blue and white Virgin Mary in the glass archway above the front door. The guy had a red car with a giant pair of red lips on top. We went driving around Dean's Grange Cemetery in it once, looking for my mother's grave, may the Lord have mercy of us. Him in his gorilla suit, and me in my French maid's outfit, giggling like idiots. Next song I demoed for Ensign that made it onto my first album was Just Like You Said It Would Be, which Stephen Wickham played on. That was about a lesson I'd been having from a certain minister on the art and outcomes of praying Psalm 91, which is where my album's title is taken from. Next, there was Never Get Old, another song I had written at school about a very quiet boy all the girls were secretly in love with. He had a hawk. He took me out to the fields once and showed me. He let me wear his leather glove and feed the birds bits of raw meat. He was a very gentle-hearted boy. On the basis of the demos, I was offered a record deal, which I signed on August 5th, 1985. The lawyer Ensign had sent me to begged me to let him find me a better deal, but I wasn't taking any risks. I was happy enough. I just wanted to get out of Ireland and be financially independent as quickly as possible, and I wasn't hanging around waiting for another opportunity. I signed for 7 points, which means that you get paid 7% of what your records sell, and you pay for pretty much everything to do with the recording and promoting and touring out of that 7%. The lawyer's duty was to read me each clause of the contract to make sure I understood it, but I was 18, and when you're 18, contracts are so boring. Just before my eyes finally glazed over, he had in all seriousness talked me through a clause that stated that if and or when records could be released on the moon, the terms of my contract would apply on the moon. He asked if I understood this, and I drifted off. There was nothing in my head after that besides a vision of the poor American flag flying in lonesome black and white on the moon. I was thinking I would much rather come home and live on Earth in colour, eating burgers and hot dogs, than have records sent up to make its loneliness worse, because no one would be there to dry its tears when it heard This Mortal Coil's cover of Song to the Siren. The day I'd left Ireland for good, a few weeks previous to signing the contract, Pete Townsend was on my plane. In those days, the Aer Lingus planes had pairs of seats facing each other like trains do, and he was sitting opposite me. Either The Who had played in Ireland, or there had been some massive gig he'd been attending. I had made my mind up before boarding the flight that I wouldn't even look behind me out the window when we took off. I took Townsend's presence as a sign I had chosen the right path, and I focused on his face as we slipped towards heaven. I hated Dublin. Everything reminded me of my mother. The shops were full of hats she would have loved, but I could never now give her. At Heathrow, there were always 2 special branch men in suits at the end of the gangway when you got off the plane from Ireland. One on the left, one on the right, standing behind black podiums just as you entered baggage reclaim. They stopped only men, specifically men with scruffy-looking beards and long hair. This is because there was a time in the early 1980s that the Northern Ireland hunger strikers were hairy, and so was everyone in the IRA. The other side didn't have beards at all, and they didn't have much hair because they were always shouting. They'd all been killing each other up there since as far back as I can remember. It was horrible on the news. Fire and blood, and kids and old people screaming in the streets, and shit all over the prison walls, and hollow-eyed skinny men whose coffins were so light they could have been carried by one small child, and gunmen at funerals, and men torn from cars there and killed. And through it all, Margaret Thatcher's hair was always perfectly set. I had made 1 or 2 visits to London in the month or so before I finally left Ireland, between which a savvy Irish music accountant tracked me down by phone at my Dublin bedsit to offer his services. I had never heard of him, or even such a thing as an accountant. "Oh," he says, "you'll need someone to manage your money for you, and also I have the perfect manager for you, Fachna O'Kelly, who used to manage the Boomtown Rats." I had actually met Fachna 5 years previously when I was 13. It was in the foyer of Dublin's forecourts one afternoon, during the time the Boomtown Rats were being prevented from performing live in Dublin. On the same day as a hearing in a case between my parents, there also happened to be a hearing in the case of the Rats. My brother Joseph became starstruck on seeing Fachna walk through the hall to go out the front doors for a smoke, and he jumped up to ask for an autograph. Beaming, he then walked Fachna over to me and said simply, "This is my little sister." I remember our handshake as if it only happened half an hour ago. I had 2 meetings with the accountant before I finally left Ireland, during both of which he drove me insane by repeatedly insisting we should run all this, the details of my record and publishing contracts, by my father before I signed. Despite this, I liked the accountant enormously. I found myself having to inform him over and over, each time in a slightly louder voice, that I was 18, thank you very much, and no longer my father's concern, and the fact of my being female didn't mean I hadn't understood the contracts when my lawyer sat down and explained them to me. He mistook my indignation for concern that my father should not have to worry about me. In reality, my granny had impressed upon me several times that a woman must never reveal her cash stash to any male relative. Next time I shook Fachna O'Kelly's hand, I was settling myself into a wobbly chair opposite him at a cafe in Marylebone High Street in London, as he cut around his egg yolks with the point of his knife. I reminded him we had met once before, but of course he didn't remember. When I got back to Dublin, he sent me a card with a note in lovely Irish-looking writing, saying he was happy to have met me. He was sure I would do well in music, and he wanted me to know I should always be myself, no matter what the business of music might wish me to be. It hadn't crossed my mind to be anything else, but it later did help having a grown-up who would stand up for one's right, for example, not to have one's eyebrows plucked for a photo session, or one's right to keep one's top on when a certain European gentleman was the photographer. This after one had been foolish enough to fall into the trap of removing one's top in the first place, because the said photographer had phrased it like a challenge. "Do you mind taking your top off?" he said to an Irish woman. I felt I had to do it to say F you for even asking. I stayed at my Aunt Martha's house in South London for my first few months in London, and got to know my 2 male cousins. One was girl dressing but straight, with long dyed red hair, the coolest guy on earth. The other had short curly blonde hair and was the other coolest guy on earth. They took me clubbing and to shop on the King's Road for a peach lycra dress. We watched Live Aid in their mother's garden. We went to Clacton-on-Sea to an all-night Doctor and the Medics concert, and I fell asleep with my head way too close to a massive speaker. My girl-dressing cousin took me to Kensington Market, and there I beheld a smorgasbord of size 12 patent leather stilettos for men. England was officially the greatest country on earth. I also found my first teacher of a spiritual nature. From the time I turned 18, if I was sitting with people I had met only once or twice, I would see in my mind the insides of their houses. I'd see the carpets, the walls, the paintings on the walls, the tiny trinkets on the bedside cabinets, the colours of the pots and pans, the stash of private letters, everything. It was as if I were floating about in their rooms. I felt driven to ask whomever I was with if what I was seeing was accurate, and it always was. I described Ensign Records' previous office when I first met Chris Hill and Nigel Grange, even though I'd never set foot in it. I didn't think much of seeing things, I just took it for granted. But people would look at me as if they felt I should have something important to tell them, and I didn't. And I got fed up disappointing them. I really wanted to get to the bottom of why it was happening so I could stop it. My Aunt Martha and her sisters shared an interest in psychic studies. I told her about what was happening, and she introduced me to a friend of hers, a 47-year-old minister of Greenwich Baptist Church, who was also a medium, and who trained people in the practice of mediumship. I told him I wanted to learn how to shut down the part of me that was drifting inside people without their permission. The thing was, it was happening because they weren't inside themselves. The first step in my training was to say Psalm 91 out loud every day. Whoever dwells in the shelter of the Most High will rest in the shadow of the Almighty. I will say of the Lord, He is my refuge and my fortress, my God in whom I trust. Surely He will save you from the fowler's snare and from the deadly pestilence. He will cover you with His feathers, and under His wings you will find refuge. His faithfulness will be your shield and rampart. You will not fear the terror of night, nor the arrow that flies by day, nor the pestilence that stalks in darkness, nor the plague that destroys at midday. 1,000 may fall at your side, 10,000 at your right hand, but it will not come near you. You will only observe with your eyes and see the punishment of the wicked. If you say, "The Lord is my refuge," and you make the Most High your dwelling, no harm will overtake you, no disaster will come near your tent. For He will command His angels concerning you, to guard you in all your ways. They will lift you up in their hands, so that you will not strike your foot against a stone. You will tread on the lion and the cobra. You will trample the great lion and the serpent. Because He loves me, says the Lord, I will rescue Him. I will protect Him, for He acknowledges my name. He will call on me, and I will answer Him. I will be with Him in trouble. I will deliver Him and honor Him. With long life I will satisfy Him and show Him my salvation. While sitting in my room one night, I saw a person reflected in the glass cabinet wearing a black hood that was hemmed with 2 gold bands. Then the lights started flashing on and off, and I ran out of there petrified. The minister said I should have stayed because I was getting a message. I said no, I'd rather not have messages from anyone in a hood. Once I'd made the final move to London and left my aunt's house, the minister declared his undying love. We had somewhat of an affair. This didn't go down well with my aunt when she figured it out, not only because the minister was married, but because I think she liked him too. She was livid. She's never gotten over it, actually. Years later, when I went to a family get-together with one of my son's dads, she glared at me across the dance floor and kept silently mouthing, I'll have him, pointing at him and then her chest. The minister had convinced me, since I was young and an idiot, that his wife didn't understand him. I was his true love and all that stuff. After a while, I realised I was being duped for the shtup, sitting by myself until our once weekly hour-long visit, not going out with anyone else. I was like Whitney Bloom in Houston, saving all my love like a total moron. Soon I stopped under-flippin' standing him too. The minister arrived one night at the flat I'd rented in Lewisham after leaving my aunt's house. He had a messed up vacuum cleaner his wife didn't want anymore. He thought I might like it as a present. He had the nerve to tell her he knew someone who might want it. I considered dropping it on his head from my 6th-floor balcony as I watched him walk into his car. I got myself a little yellow Fiat Bambino. You could drive in England then with only a provisional licence. I'd never had one lesson in my life. I got in the car really late at night and had a crash. Called the minister and said, "I'm hurt. Crashed my car, will you come get me?" He said no, he wouldn't, because he didn't want anyone to see him with me. I never contacted him again. I was actually badly hurt, twisted my pelvis, got slammed into it full speed by a car on the driver's side. Still have to get straightened out now and then. Right side doesn't move like it should. Walk funny. Walk like Charlie Chaplin. Didn't walk like that before. Settling in. There are about 8 million people in the whole of London. That's twice the entire population of Ireland. I'm finding that a little frightening, for the same reason infinity is frightening. It's just too big. The Thames is 100 times the width of the Liffey. There are always the lights of planes in the sky. Planes from all over the world, always on the way in. Planes only fly past Ireland on their way to somewhere else. Usually they're Irish planes carrying Irish people into and out of the country for amounts of money that increase towards Christmas, the very time anyone who's had the intelligence to leave Ireland needs to come back for fear of being a bad son or daughter. I hate Christmas. I feel pain in my soul, like someone drove a 3 through my chest. Apart from my cousins and my aunt, the only people I know in London are Chris and Nigel from Ensign and Faulkner, my manager. I spend a good bit of time at Chris's house. He's really kind and nice to me. He looks after me a lot. I suspect he's slightly in love with me, but he has a wonderful wife he would never disrespect. Nigel gave me 2 tapes of Van Morrison songs. I never heard him before. He sounds like one of those Tibetan monks, the kind who use their voices for healing. I get hoovered up by him into some university beyond the veil. It isn't about his words, it's what he does with the sounds of them. He's taken me to where I'm supposed to study. I see beautiful stone buildings, golden buttressed. My flat has one sitting room at the front of the building, looking out onto Hither Green Lane, a small bedroom next to it, and a kitchen, and it's above an Indian grocery shop. The people down there are nice to me. I was friends with their skinny son, who was about my age and into music. We didn't fancy each other or anything, it was just a friendship. We'd just sit and shoot the breeze. I had a record player and he didn't, and he could smoke a cigarette away from the wrath of his parents. He was a very sensitive lad. At some point his father decided he needed toughening up and forced him to join the paratroopers. Poor thing ran up my stairs in a panic with terror in his eyes, saying, "What am I going to do?" There was nothing either of us could do. His father had sprung it on him, and he was to leave the very next day. About 2 weeks later, I heard my bell ringing in the night. I went to see who was there, and it was him. He had run away. I was filled with pride at his bravery. His face was a picture of shock, not only from what he'd endured over the fortnight, being screamed at, push-ups, all the usual stuff you see on telly, but from the fact he was defying his father. He was afraid to go home, so he stayed with me and slept on my sofa for about a week, during which I would go downstairs every day and buy the food we were going to eat, chatting away with his parents, careful not to mention their son, and they never mentioned him, and then back up I'd go. Once he left and went on the run, I never heard from him again. I didn't live in Hither Green Lane for long after that. I'm lonely, but I'm writing songs for my first album, and songs are a lonely person's occupation. Songs are ghosts. When my album comes out, I'll be a travelling ghost delivery woman. There'll be a lifetime of goodbyes, and I can't have a problem with that. I wrote a song called Troy about my mother and about the minister. I did the demo vocal in Chris's house. I made him stand outside the door. When I let him back in, he was really shaken. He said he'd never heard anything like it or the volume of it. He made me play it over and over. Sometimes I walk around Fleet Street when it's empty on Sundays because I secretly want to write for newspapers. Not about news or even music, but about poems and plays. I wonder if they would have me, but I never did any exams. I also go to the Spiritualist Society for the public readings to see how the different mediums work. I vividly remember getting into a fight with a skinhead outside a red phone box. An East Asian woman was inside, spilling out a million words in some exotic language, quick as she could, because she had only a few coins. The skinhead dude was yelling at her to hurry up, and he started banging on the door, though I was next in the queue. I said he should leave her alone. He detected I was Irish and yelled at me, "London phone boxes are for London people." And I said, well, if you lot had left us a thing of our own in our own countries, we wouldn't need to use your manky phone boxes with their stickers of hooers everywhere, so shut the fuck up. 3 of his friends were in the queue, and I think that I got my face broken if they hadn't started laughing at him because he'd been out argued by a girl. And thank God for pride saving alone, he'd had to pretend he saw the funny side. I got to make my call, and they all shook my hand when I was finished, and then stood back on the path to make way for me like I was Bishop John McQuaid in Dublin, imperially strutting down Grafton Street on Christmas. A lesson or two. I hang around with Faulkner a lot. He has a whole room full of shelves filled with records. He has more records than anyone I've ever seen. He buys all the records that are on the Jamaican charts from Dub Vendor on Ladbroke Grove. He says every time he moves flats, he takes them all with him. That must be why he doesn't have a wife or a girlfriend. Where would she ever put her stuff? He's been playing me lots of the reggae singles that came out in the last year. I love the Barrington Levy one called Here I Come, about the guy whose baby mother makes him take the child because she doesn't want to be tied down. It's sad, but you want to leap in the air too because of the way he uses his voice. When she says she doesn't want the child, he doesn't use words. He just cries out, "Shiddly waddly boop diddly diddly whoa." And it says all the millions of thoughts and feelings a man would have in that few seconds, better than even Oscar Wilde could have. I'm crazy about the music Faulkner's playing me. Only reggae I ever heard before was the Israelites, or 54-46, an Uptown Top Ranking. But he's played me a guy called Prince Buster, a funny song called Judge Dredd. It's all a crazy courtroom scene. The judge keeps sentencing everyone to 400 years. And then it has the sweetest but most threatening backing vocals, accompanied by 4 trumpet notes over and over with drums, and a bass and keyboard playing nothing but the chords. Faulkner took me to see his friend Leroy, who also goes by the name of Lepke. He has a pirate radio station called the Dread Broadcasting Company, the DBC, and he runs a stall on Portobello Road selling reggae records. Portobello Market runs on Saturdays and Sundays. It's a massive tourist attraction, crowded with people from what must be every country on earth. As they wander by on Saturday afternoons, Leroy blares records from 2 huge speakers at the front of his stall. Jamaican fashion is to start a record again pretty quickly if it's wonderful. The young people walking by yell, "Wheel!" whenever he does it, and then they just keep walking. I love it. Leroy has a microphone set up on the pavement by the stall. In Jamaica they do a brilliant thing. They release the backing track of records without any vocals so that people can sing along with it themselves. So when you buy the single with the vocal, you also get what's called the rhythm version as well. Sort of like karaoke, but Jamaican singers even write different lyrics and vocal melodies on the same rhythm, and all of them are smash hits. On the first day I went there, Leroy played a rhythm or 2 in the late afternoon. Several young men whose long hair hung down in dreadlocks began wandering over from different directions of the market and commenced nonchalantly browsing through the records and T-shirts. but soon they could be detected inching towards the vicinity of his mic, where they eventually parked themselves, grinding their toes into the ground with shyness and excitement, eyes from floor to mic to each other and back, much wringing of hands, much rocking, much biting of lips. As each young man took the mic, it seemed older men with the same types of braids gathered. Men who, in their dances, just stepped forward and back, now and again lifting one hand high in the air as if to warn someone of something. I'd been leaning against the wall behind the stall, but I couldn't make out what the young guys were singing because of their accents. Only 4 words I'd understood because they were shouted loud whenever they'd come along in the song. Those were burn, Pope, Babylon, and blood. I was also pretty sure I heard fire rhymed with liar. The realization that all the old guys' arms would raise when those particular words were said made me curious. I sauntered around the side of the stall, looking for someone to talk to at the back of the gathering. The voices on the mic kept changing while the rhythm did not. A plumpish old fellow was leaning on his bike outside a pub's door, lighting the very small end of a spliff that he held with his tweezers. His white hair was so long he had it wrapped all round his head like a hat, but there was enough left over that it hung down the back of his blue shirt. I put my face in front of his, and over the music I said, "Can I ask you something, please?" And he put the spliff behind his back and said, "What if I don't want a Hansa?" I said, "What?" "I might not want a Hansa." I said, "What are you talking about? I'm not asking you to dance." He said, "Your question. I might not want a Hansa hit." Took ages to understand. I said, "What's Babylon?" He laughed. I said, "Why are you laughing?" He laughed again. I said, "Why are they saying Babylon burn? And why are they saying the Pope must burn? And why are the old guys dancing like that, wagging their fingers in the air?" He flung his head back, coughing, laughing now. He said, "Where you came from?" I said, "Ireland." He said, and stared at me in silence out the bottom of his sunglasses for several seconds. Eventually he said, "England own that?" I said, "What?" "Do England own Ireland?" I said, "No." There wasn't time to go into it. "Well then," he said, "nobody owned God too." He paused for a moment and looked at me. "What them teach you in a church in Ireland? Them show you Revelation?" I said, "What?" He said, "Them Catholic, the Pope and all them thing. Them's not a Christian. That is why them didn't inform you God is coming. Pope is the devil, and him office is the office of the devil. You got yourself a Bible, daughter?" he asked. I said, "Yeah, I got a few." "Well, read Prophet and Revelation and check Rasta music all your life. Babylon is devil's yard. It will burn because Revelation say it must." And with that he climbed off his bike and wheeled it slowly in the sunset toward Westbourne Grove. I waited a while to make sure he wasn't looking behind him, and then I followed. The road onto which he turned right and unsaddled was called All Saints. There was a betting shop, a record shop, and a takeout place, outside of which several other old men with lion hairdos were standing around talking in Jamaican accents. I parked myself on the doorstep not far from them, listening to how they were using words. It was beautiful. I never heard English spoken like that. And they weren't like regular old men. They weren't talking about football or politics. They were talking like priests. The long-haired man in the record shop was playing reggae songs real loud, the lyrics all full of scripture, lines from which got yelled and passionately discussed in the light of his doorway. I go into the record shop and ask the old man what part of the Bible such and such a song he's played is from. I have a notebook with me that I take everywhere. I write down what he tells me, then I go home and read the passages. He finds me amusing, I think. He smiles at me so nicely. His face is like a huge sun shining. He says, What is it today, little daughter? Any time I talk to the old men, they call me little daughter. If middle-aged men are around, they call me little sister. They're really kind to me. They never mess about. They're very protective. They ask me if I ate and give me Jamaican patties if I say no. They never mind that I just hang about beside them, not saying a whole lot. Inflammable material. I'm still looking at pictures of how to play chords from books. I just throw a capo on my guitar and it changes the keys of the few chord sequences I know. I play as few chords as possible and nothing posh. I can't do bar chords and I can't play above a whisper. I double track the guitars on my demos. I have a 4-track machine. It's like a tape recorder you can plug a guitar and a mic into. I also have a shiny red mic stand and a black microphone on a lead. I have 2 guitars, one 12-string and one 6-string, both Takamines. I have an electric keyboard too. All of this equipment and some assorted accoutrements were paid for by Ensign as part of my deal. I have it all set up in my sitting room in Hithergreen Lane, but the recording machine is small enough that I can take it places with me. I play one guitar quietly and record one track, singing the lyrics in my head. Then I play that back and record myself playing the other guitar quietly alongside it, so that there's 2 guitars and it doesn't matter if I'm quiet. When I need to play loud, that way of recording helps too, because layering the guitars disguises how terribly I play. You can turn up and down the levels of your guitars and voice throughout the song and smother it in reverb as you're mixing a final tape of it for yourself. I bring the tapes into Ensign and make Nigel and Chris listen to them with headphones. They think I have enough songs to start putting a band together so that I can rehearse. Then I'll be ready to actually record when the time comes. They want me to get used to singing my own songs, and they want me to write songs with other people too. I'm glad about that, because it's my favourite thing when someone else writes the music, given I'm so limited. Handing me a piece of paper across the table at the Greek restaurant up the road from Ensign's office, Nigel said, "Ali McMordy from Stiff Little Fingers lives in Putney. I want you to go round there on Thursday morning at 10. Jesus, I nearly passed out because I love Stiff Little Fingers. You're going to meet Ali, who plays bass, and a drummer friend of his called John Reynolds. You can write some songs with them." I went there on the day I was told. As I crossed the road to find the right gate, I saw a man who had just parked a black BMW and was locking it. He had curly hair and was wearing a grey vest that said Mikey Dread in green letters. He was carrying 2 drumsticks. "Are you Sinead?" he said at the same time I said, "Are you John?" Ali had a white plaster cast of his girlfriend's arse on his kitchen counter. He brought me and John through to the sitting room to listen to my songs. They really liked Troy. They asked me what kind of songs I'd like to write with them. I think I just said nothing prissy. At lunchtime, John and I went out to a cafe. While we were chatting, I began to see images of a bedroom. As I mentioned, I sometimes see inside people's houses with my mind. It's not on purpose, it just happens, and there's no big, deep and meaningful reason for it. A little table with small ornaments on it beside the bed. Lace curtains and lavender. A stack of letters on a shelf. The dark curtains drawn. The images were so strong I asked John if he recognised the room. He said it was his sister Audrey's room and that she was dying. He was distraught. She was in a lot of pain. He was minding her far from London, but driving to the city every day to work so as to keep his sanity. With his tight-cut dark curls and his huge blue eyes, John looked like a child, but his body was like a giant's, his hands like massive shovels. He changed the subject, started telling lewd jokes, using the C word more than anyone I'd ever met. I felt we would be bonded for life. Shaving my head. Nigel is a square unto high heaven, as anyone with Nigel for a name is bound to be. He and Chris invited me down to Ensign a few days ago. I had lunch with them at Cannes, and halfway through it, Nigel announced he'd like me to stop cutting my hair short and start dressing like a girl. He was disapproving of my recent attempt at a very short mohawk. He said himself and Chris would like me to wear short skirts with boots and perhaps some feminine accessories such as earrings, necklaces, bracelets, and other noisy items one couldn't possibly wear close to a microphone. When he finished speaking, I said to Chris, who had been nodding his head in silent agreement with Nigel's every word, "So let me get this straight. He wants me to look like your mistress and the bird he left his wife for." Silence as I stood up and gathered my keys and ciggies. Chris had such a great face. The huge eyes on him couldn't disguise his admiration for the observation or for the mischievousness of finding it so amusing. When I told Faulkner about events, he said, "I think you should fucking shave your head." So I went to the barber the next day, Greek place by a bathhouse near Ensign, and I could call into them straight after the deed was done. I had arranged to swing by on the pretence of having receipts to give Doreen, their lovely secretary, who was a reasonable, older, blonde-haired lady. The man running the barber shop that day was maybe 26. I was 19. He was indeed Greek, mildly plump, short black hair, dark 5 o'clock shadow. Clearly he'd been left in charge by himself, and despite the fact he had no customers but me, he was in somewhat of a flap. I slid into his red leather chair and announced, "I want to look like a boy." And when it dawned on him exactly what I meant, which because I didn't speak any Greek, I made clear by a series of hand gestures that I think might have at first confused him, he went running for the phone on the wall, maybe to call the owner, tears beginning to well up in his eyes. There was no answer. He was all alone. "Please don't make me do it, please," he beseeched, hanging up the phone and walking towards me with his hands held as if in prayer, his tone as soft as if he had given birth to me himself. "Your beautiful hair." When he finally got across the room to me, sensing my refusal to be swayed and seeing my eyes so determined, a blood-curdling terror arose in his mind, and his hands went up instinctively to protect his throat. "What will your father say?" he uttered with a very sharp intake of breath. And, "What will your brother say?" he said as he let it out. Then another sharp breath in and a horrified pause, and then, "Oh my God! What will your boyfriend say? Oh my God!" At this, his eyes bulged so with fear that I thought they might pop. And with additional hand gestures, because he didn't speak much Irish, he let me know he really didn't want to risk any males coming around to beat him up. I assured him no one would, though by this stage I was rather considering beating him up myself. After I'd convinced him that I was the sole author of my own destiny despite being female, and explained that my father was in Ireland, conveyed by running around the shop with my arms out like a plane, saying, "Irlandes, Papa est in Irlandes." He agreed to do it, but he made his feelings abundantly clear all the way through. "It's not right to do for girl." When he finished, I stood up to face him, and one tear rolled down his right cheek. Me, I loved it. I looked like an alien. I looked like Star Trek. Didn't matter what I wore now. When I walked through Ensign, I got stunned silence from Nigel. Doreen, with her back to him, gave me a silent double thumbs up with a playful smile, and Chris asked me to sit in the car with him later. "Why have you done it?" "Because I want to be me." "Can't you be you with hair?" I said, "It's you who needs hair, you baldy old fecker, not me. Why don't you let me help you find a doctor?" The Lion and the Cobra. There are tiny lights all up and down the massive mixing board. Red, yellow or green, depending how loud you sing. If you get too loud, they go red, which means there'll be distortion on tape. Object of my game has been to ride the very finest of fine lines between green and yellow, so that it is now less often the case Mr. Happy, the producer, has to worry. I can tell I'm not going to have much of a say in mixes when it comes to vocal level, so I need to be sure every word or end of word I sing in a whisper is going to get heard, because the producer just pulls me down to some random level in the mix and leaves me there. The whispered words get lost, and I didn't write them for nothing, so I've made my voice into its own master fader. I did it by watching the lights on my home recording device as I sang into the mic with the volume at just above mid-level. I memorized where green finished and let it sink into my body the same way notes do, so the avoidance of yellow is now part of the songs. You can move around a mic within a certain triangular energy field. The size of each field depends on the type of mic. Some require you to be on top of them, as we call it, because the space in which they pick up your voice is so tiny. Others have a larger field and you can throw your head about in order to achieve what you want without the lights going past green. You let your body use the field the same way an actor uses a stage. How far is too far? How close is too close? You can feel it with your face. I'm in the middle of recording my first album. Nigel chose the producer, who's a fucking moron and has absolutely no sense of humour, and he needs one given his terrible beard and how embarrassing he's making my record sound. Not only have I lost my own sense of humour, but I'm a little more drained of the will to live each time the producer plays a song back. I've literally been crying on the inside, smiling on the outside, because I don't want to hurt anyone's feelings. The only people I've discussed it with are John Reynolds and Faulkner. John's been here in the studio the whole time because he's the drummer and we're staying together. So we've often talked about perhaps running away to the other side of Mars in the event the record comes out with our names on it. In the beginning, in an excellent demonstration of how the term anal retentive might be used in a musical sense, the producer spent hours just getting the bass drum sound right, or just the hi-hat, before recording a note. All day long. Who does that? He had the band waiting whole days to play, which meant me waiting late nights to sing, all because he couldn't or wouldn't take a musical shit. He's had his back to me mostly and he wears a lot of grey. He sits at the centre of the soundboard in the producer's chair, which is always the biggest of the 3 swivel chairs in the room. He actually doesn't so much sit at the desk as lean over it with his head in his hands, a position of defeat. He looks like he's planning to fake his own death. About a fortnight ago, Faulkner said that despite the fact I didn't know how to use the studio equipment, I could start fresh and produce my album myself if I want. All I needed to do was tell an engineer what I wanted. He said that's all a producer did anyway. But, I said, what about the £100,000 the record company has already spent on these recordings? Nigel would have a nervous breakdown. I couldn't upset him like that. If I did that, I may just as well have taken his £100,000 and thrown it down the toilet. Then Faulkner told me something I hadn't realised, that the £100,000 was my own money, because under the contract, such costs were fully recoupable. Still, I said I couldn't hurt Nigel's feelings. But then someone asked me for something on Nigel's behalf, something that wasn't in our contract, and that has made me stop caring about either his money or his feelings. We were in the studio on Friday night, recording a cover of The Doors' Crystal Ship, and I couldn't reach a high note. That had never happened before. I got really mad after the millionth failed attempt and I punched the mic. That had never happened before either. As I heard it hit the ground, I thought, I'm pregnant. Saturday morning I bought a test from the chemist before I went to the studio. had to pee in a tiny glass tube that had a small globule of light yellow jelly inside, and then sit the tube in a little holder that had a small mirror underneath, in which soon a lovely pink circle appeared. Beautiful looking thing it was too, like a little planet. I immediately ran and grabbed a cushion from one of the studio reception area sofas and dashed back to the bathroom so as to stuff it up my jumper so I could see what I'd look like all fat with a baby. I turned myself this way and that in the mirrors and jumped up and down with excitement, so happy. John was the father, and when I told him my news the next day at Hammersmith Market, he was shaken. I fell totally out of love with him, and my heart closed. I couldn't have sex with him anymore. I didn't tell him why because I felt guilty, so I told him there must be something wrong with me in the sex department. When I told Nigel, he smiled nicely and said I should go to Ensign's house doctor to initiate my pregnancy care. I went the next evening. The doctor told me Nigel had already called him and expressed the wish that he, the doctor, would impress upon me the following, which he, the doctor, said in the following words: "Your record company has spent £100,000 recording your album. You owe it to them not to have this baby." Furthermore, he informed me that if I flew while pregnant, my baby would be damaged. And anyway, if I was going to be a musician, I ought not have babies, because a woman shouldn't leave her baby to go on tour, and at the same time a child can't be taken on tour. I haven't cried so much in years. Nigel can shove his 100,000 and his producer. I'm starting again. Clocks and walks. So I'm at least 100 grand in debt starting off, and I earn only 5 grand a year. If this record doesn't make that money back and more, because it's the second time it's been recorded, I will never be financially independent of people with penises. Speaking of which, I'm also nearly as pregnant as a person can be. Baby is rolling around nicely, and I'm beside myself with excitement. I hope it's been okay in there when I've been recording vocals. Some of the songs are nothing but a load of yelling. I got thrown out of an Italian cafe in Charing Cross last week by the old lady running the place because I had on, cut so short that my bump was exposed, a white t-shirt on which was printed, "Always use a condom." She wasn't seeing the funny side. I'm staying in an old-fashioned bed and breakfast place in Putney. I'll be staying there for the next 3 weeks while we mix the album. It's a red brick family-looking house with, thank God, only one flight of stairs. The street is a family-looking street. The houses are all family-looking. Cream linen handkerchiefs with tiny lilies embroidered in each corner are folded in triangles on my bedside cabinets. A glass jug with a belly like mine sits in vain hope, full of water on the shelf by the telly. I haven't touched it. I've enjoyed waddling my fat self along the white fences and overgrown trees of the street to the studio for the past few days. All in all, it's a lot nicer than where we stayed when we were recording, the Cipriana Hotel, aptly named because in Dublin a hideous dump is slangily called a kip. There were actually fleas. John Reynolds and I endured every manner of them and their tiny teeth in the nights. But we did so gladly, because we were acutely aware that our being there meant we had by some miracle become ex-thieves and now had the chance of earning a legitimate living. If we hadn't been in the music business, we'd be stealing a lot of stuff together and ending up in separate jails. When John and I first met, the back of his car was full of clocks and walks. He and his mate had broken into some vast warehouse. It was coming up to Christmas, and they had no money. They were selling some of the clocks and walks they'd stolen and giving others to the females in their lives as Christmas presents. John's mother got a clock and a walk. The less revered females got one or the other. The thing I'm going to remember most about making our record is when I met John Keogh. He was lying on the floor outside the studio toilet, hugging himself because he just jacked up a load of smack. "Hello, Shine-eyed," he slurred in his East London accent, and then giggled at himself as his eyes rolled up into the back of his head. Just as I lifted my foot to step over him, he said, "Don't worry, I won't look up your skirt." He is the bass player with Max, and we were recording their song, Just Call Me Joe. He has thick black eyelashes, long as spiders' legs. His eyes are real pale yellow-green, look like dandelion clocks. Whenever he's been at my place, his eyes have spun around on his face like the snakes in the Jungle Book because he's always on the Class A drugs. But he's not a snaky person. He's an innocent. That's why he can't bear the world. He leans against my door, says he has no sisters, so he likes talking to me. He looks at me like he's impressed, like a child in awe. I ask him why. He said he should never have been asked to be a grown-up, and I should never have been asked to be a child. He's impressed that anyone would want to be a grown-up. His smile makes people smile because he slightly laughs. He tries to hide that he's so beautiful because he gets beaten up for it around his neighborhood. He'll turn his face away or look down. He dresses scruffy and has zits, and his teeth are all grey from smack and yellow from everything else. But he does employ the smile when the smack has closed his eyes. He's very clever. It's always for other people's benefit, never his own. He wants us not to worry about him. He wants us to think he's okay, but he isn't okay. Eventually, he falls asleep in the bath. For the mixing, it's been just me and the engineer and the tape ops. They get the shitty jobs mostly, running around making endless cups of tea and coffee for musicians and producers, having to be in before everyone else and be last to leave, having to go out to the shops for sandwiches or any other fancies of the contingent. They're nerds, but strictly in the sense that Superman is a nerd. And from observing them, I've come to realize that if it were not for nerds, no records would ever have been made. There'd just be a load of stoned musicians and coked up record executives, the latter too busy pleading not guilty to aggravated sexual harassment on the grounds of being over-coked and getting away with it to be of any service in the recording process. No other type of man is capable of performing the task from which a tape op takes his name. This man can do something no other man would dare risk. The bosses in the studio situation make him do it, because among all of them he is the least to lose. But the fact that he can do it makes him king over all. He can splice the tape to make an edit. So if the first half of the song went along nicely, but the second half was shite, and it was the other way round on the previous take, he could make a slice with a Wilkinson sword razor blade across the tape just before it all went wrong, and make a slice in the previous tape just before it all went right, and stitch them together with special adhesive so that the whole song is right and you don't have to record all over again. He does it by getting the producer to play the track, and then once the desired place of edit has been established, the track is put into slow motion playback around that area. As these playbacks are happening, the tape op is eyeing the tape as it rolls around the two reels. Eventually, he will take hold of the sides of both reels and turn them this way and that until the song gets so slow and the vocal so deep that it sounds like a horror movie. He'll keep turning the tapes until he finds the shortest of breaths in the music and observe where it is on the tape. Only when his eye can recognize it will he remove his hands, at which point he pulls a 4-inch section of the tape from between the two reels down onto a little steel bridge that looks like a leprechaun's train tracks and makes a vertical line with tailor's chalk. He has one slice in which to get it right. Disaster will result if he messes it up. A lot of money and a lot of artistic temperament is in the room. Knuckles are desperately held between teeth. Everyone's silent as a ghost for the 1.5 minutes it takes for the cut to be made, the adhesive applied, and the tape played back. Because he is Lord of all, it never goes wrong. It is pristine on the first shot. He gets to rest a while, with his feet on the cream leather poof, having coffee and biscuits brought to him for a change by whoever the bosses are. He is cosmetic surgeon to the stars. My Boy Lollipop, July 1987. Jake went blue in his little blanket from toe to head in my room on me, so I got the nurse and she grabbed him and ran off down the corridor. She wouldn't let me come. I was frantic. An older nurse was passing by my door, and out the window behind her I could see the opposite wing of the hospital, the part where people go to die. I took her by the arm and pleaded, "My baby went blue and they've taken him. He's not going to die, is he?" "I hope not," she replied and kept walking. Jesus, that would never happen in Ireland. Someone would hold your hand. But I'm at John Radcliffe Hospital in Oxford. I'm 20 years old, like. This is my first baby. I've never been so frightened in my life. That night of his birth, I had a terrible dream that the doctor came into the room with the child all wrapped in a blanket, and he gave the child to me, but as I put the child up on my shoulder, he fell out of the blanket and onto the floor, and his little forehead broke like a teacup. I hoped that that was not a bad omen for my parenting skills. He's back now, thanks be to God. They put him in an incubator for an hour. He's a little early and he's only 6 pounds 6 ounces. I'm kinda tiny, so he is too. That's what the nurse said. Also, after he came out, I think they left him on me too long without wrapping him up. They were so busy faffing with the placenta, he froze his little butt off. It's hot inside a body, so it stands to reason it's freezing when you come out. Nothing in the books warned me, so I didn't have a blanket, and the birth room didn't have one. He wasn't wrapped up for a good half an hour. A friend at John's told me to drink a load of castor oil as soon as I went into labour. I don't know why I took her advice. She said it would make the birth easier, but then she's the one who 9 months previously told me the 14th day of your cycle is the only day you can't get pregnant. She never told me if I drank castor oil I'd shit for Ireland, and the birth would be so quick there'd be no time for drugs. There was a poor little student nurse in a blue uniform on that night. She couldn't have been more than 18. It was really late. She had to keep giving me little grey papier-mâché bowls to shit in, and then she had to carry them away when they were full. I must have filled about 20 of them. The blackest looking shit I've ever seen in my life, apart from the one my lovely little son did about half an hour after he was born. That was like tart toothpaste. I'm thus very impressed with him so far, but also because he's really cute and red and hairy. He's exactly like a baby monkey. Jake was born at 4 minutes to 4 a.m. Long, rough night. John went home to get some sleep after showering the blood off me at about 5 a.m., a task magnanimously assigned to him by the midwife, as though it were the greatest honour one could bestow upon a man who spent the night watching his woman give birth, in and all over his poshest white dinner shirt. Word to the wise, never lend a full-term pregnant woman an item of clothing you want back. He's not too happy about the haircut I gave him the night before last, so he had fun splattering me against the tiles with cold water instead of warm. My defence is that he asked me to do it, and anyone who puts someone with my haircut in charge of his own deserves what he gets. I sheared the sides rather badly, and I don't know how to blend. He nearly cried when he saw it. But I think I've made up for it because he loves his little baby, and he said I can wear his blue and white nightshirt. And his mom is going to come down from Liverpool the day after tomorrow to see her first grandchild. She's lovely, John's mum. I love her. She's from Yorkshire, and she's as bold as a little child, eating sweets when she's diabetic. Betty is her name. It really suits her, 'cause she has big brown Betty Boop eyes. She has a crazy dog, though. No way am I bringing Jake to her house. The postmen keep quitting. She's had her garage converted into a front room, all pretty and flowery. What was the garage door is now a huge window. Stupid dog keeps launching himself through it when anyone passes the gate. It's a Doberman. I hate it. It pinned me against the wall for ages the second I met Betty. So embarrassing. Betty's so nice to John. She just adores him. She only pretend scolds him. He farts out loud all the time around her and they crack up laughing. John's sister, Maria, is the same. Maria has tons of tattoos, but Betty doesn't know. I wish I were Betty's daughter, or one of the kids she raised. She's so kind and gentle. Her voice is so loving and warm. It goes up and down like a mother's voice should. Her boys come to visit her still. They're men now, like John. They adore her. She loved them into the straight and narrow. They have jobs because of her, and girlfriends and all. One of her sons told his girlfriend he was going round the corner for cigarettes and didn't come back for 2 years. Then they got married. He's really funny. He's going to be a lovely dad. I want to make clear that I don't blame John, or my dad for that matter, for being concerned about me having a baby. There were many reasons to be concerned, and I know they meant the very best for me. I don't believe that in the case of the record company, though. Their only expressed concern was money, whereas John and my father were worried about my youth. Valid concerns based on love, in other words. John really deserves his own chapter in this book because he's like my brother and my best friend in this world. I've known him since I was 18 and he was 28, and that's a long set of years. He has always been there for me as a friend, even when I've been wrong. He has always been my rock and has always taken care of me. I've had the absolute funniest times of my life with John, and I've never laughed so much with any other human being, nor farted out loud as much. John is a legendary farter out loud, and it's catching. Today, his studio is at the top of the home he shares with Fiona, his amazing wife, and their 2 daughters, Jessie and Ruby. All manner of artists have worked and stayed there, from Shayan Kuti to Robert Plant to the Indigo Girls, to myself, to Damien Dempsey, basically anyone you can think of, because John is an utter musical midwife. He is able, sometimes by farting out loud, to make people feel so comfortable that they can fully be themselves in a way they couldn't in any other studio. He always gets the very best out of any performer. John has 2 bull mastiff dogs and loves them like they're his children. He's an amazing father, and Fiona is an amazing mother. I've never once heard a raised voice in their house that wasn't singing. He has been and still is an incredible father to Jake, and thank God Jake is the spit of him, as we say in Ireland. They are so alike. I couldn't find words to describe how much I love John and how much he means to me. He is my family, and I wouldn't have sung nearly anything well if not for the fact I was comfortable enough with him to be recording in there in my pyjamas and slippers, him making me cry laugh with farts emitted in time to backing tracks. I'd be lost without John in my life. I'd be nothing without the companionship and creativity and brotherhood and laughter and emotional support he's given me. He is the very anchor of my life. There just are not words. But the catalogue of music we have made together over the course of the last 35 years says it all, and is the legacy of our bond. A beautiful dance through life we have had together, and still have, and always will have. The way young lovers do. When John went to pick Betty up at the station, I gave Jake his first bath. Poor creature roared crying. It was terrible. He was red all over from upset. He's so little. Betty fell in love. She's so cool. She gave him a statue of a cute fat rabbit with green trousers on and a yellow shirt and a big smile. Having Jake was also somewhat discombobulating. One day, about a week after Jake was born, me and John went out in the car and didn't remember we had a tiny baby until we were about 100 feet down the road. Nearly had a heart attack when we realised. Screeched the car around and went back home for him. Another night I had a terrible nightmare that I left Jake with my mother to mind him while I went shopping. Never had such a frightening dream in my life. Woke up sweating and feeling for Jake in the low light to make sure it wasn't true. Babies don't actually smile at you for 6 weeks, and when Jakey smiles, it's the most beautiful gummy thing I've ever seen. His whole face and eyes light up. The first time he did it, he was lying on his little belly in my bed. Apart from John Reynolds, the person during that time who unequivocally supported my desire to be both a touring musician and a mother was Faulkner, my manager. He was the only one saying I could be a good mother and that he'd make sure there was always help. I'd known him for 2 years and now he'd become my hero. 3 months after Jake was born and my album was about to come out, reviews were in the papers and our promo trips were kicking off. I'm 20 and in Bloom's Hotel in Dublin. As I carry a tray of coffee to where Joe Jackson from Hot Press is sitting in the bar waiting to interview me, my arms and legs are shaking. We've flown in from London to promote The Lion and the Cobra. I don't know who these people are meeting, but it isn't me. We're in the American Hotel in Amsterdam, and I'm in a room talking to 10 people a day, one after the other, all of them with microphones and notepads in their hands, with cameras and flashing white lights. Will I stand this way or that? I don't even know what town we're in. I don't care what's for lunch. I don't care why I made a record. I don't even know what planet I'm on. Whatever Faulkner thinks is a good idea is a good idea. What he loves, I love. What he hates, I try to hate. All I want to do is keep impressing him. I say whatever I imagine will impress him. I become whatever I imagine will impress him. Sometimes I think I'm more like him than me. There is a light that never goes out. 1987. I am on tour in freezing England, supporting In Excess. Right after I had agreed to tour with them, David Bowie asked me to support his band. It was a disappointment that I couldn't accept, but it's brilliant that he asked me nonetheless. Mike Joyce and Andy Rourke from The Smiths are in my band. Andy is the funniest person I've ever met in my life. I love him. Andy and his brothers would be on acid when the parish priest came round for tea with them and their father. The boys had to try to act normal around the table and not be crying laughing. That's one reason I love Andy. He laughs. Crying laughing is the greatest feeling ever and the funniest thing to watch. Him and Mike are really funny together. They make each other roll around on the floor. I love Mike too. They've made me love Manchester people. Dead straight, no bullshit, no unfrank conversation. Also, they treat me like a boy, which makes me a happy girl. Among musicians, there really doesn't exist the attitude toward females that exists among the suits of the music industry, and that exists generally in Ireland. So while I'm with musicians and road crew, it's good to be a girl. It's mostly guys I'm around, and they treat me like a guy, so I'm learning real well how to be like a guy. You're safer being a travelling musician if you feel like you're a guy. Not safe as in safe from people, but safe from life on the road being rough, and from the fact you're a female uncommon to what is outlined as natural. You're acting like you have the same freedoms as men. That's going to be hard for you to manage. A woman's place is in the home, not on Highway 66, especially if she's a mother as I am. You're going to be doing your own head in for the rest of your life every time you go to work if you don't keep telling yourself you're a man. It's so lovely when people like Andy or Mike or John Reynolds or John Keogh or John Mabry's gang don't treat me any differently because I'm a girl, except in nice ways, like when Mabry, the video director, gets someone to put makeup on me and keeps telling me I'm pretty. He's gay as Christmas, so it's even nicer than when a straight man says it, because straight men all say it to get laid. John Mabry and all his friends say it because they love girls. They make me feel really nice about being a girl, but I do like to look like a boy. They've never blinked an eye about it. No one does, except poor Nigel Grange. I like to look like John Maybury's friend Alan, basically. He's so handsome, with a crew cut, and he has a soft, lovely voice. His eyes always brimful of gentleness when he looks at absolutely anyone. His whole heart is in his eyes at all times. He doesn't have a temper, and he isn't afraid of people. I wish I were like him. I have a temper, and I'm afraid of most people. Maybury, not long before, had pulled off an amazing musical promotional coup. It's 1987, and there's full war in Northern Ireland, but despite this, Maybury and his crazy lighting man managed to carry pounds and pounds of napalm from Heathrow through Dublin Airport unobserved at either end to use in the video shoot. We rigged up the Hellfire Club, an infamous 18th century ruin on a hill overlooking Dublin. Must have blown it up 5 times. It's a national monument. We didn't even ask permission. The dude who rigged it was an army expert. Nothing fell off or over. We left the structure intact. It was for the video of my first single, Troy. We shot the first part in a freezing cold studio in East London. John had all his friends working on the video. They shaved my head completely bald with a bunch of Bics. Then they covered me from head to chest in pure gold leaf, like that James Bond girl, and sat me to sing in a circle of fire. I was going round and round all day on a little train track, and John told me to keep finding the camera. I looked like a very pissed off alien whose breath sets fire to stuff. Anyway, back to In Excess. I met Michael Hutchins in Dublin Airport when we were all checking in for the first date of the tour. He was really nice to me. He's like a big brother type. He's protective, not flirty or anything. He isn't around much, but when I've hung out with him there's been lots of people everywhere, and he always watches out for me very quietly. No matter if he's chatting someone up across the room on some sofa, or talking to friends or whatever. He makes sure some idiot doesn't talk me into bed or bore me to death with music industry talk. I like him. He doesn't say a lot with words. He says it with looks. He's like some kind of American Indian. During the tour, me and Andy Rourke got beaten up in Liverpool by the bouncer of our hotel's basement disco. Big hairy monster. Looked like he served in Belfast for the Brits. The moustache on him and all. So reminiscent. He didn't like my Doc Martens. Fair enough. They have steel toe caps sticking out, as is the fashion. I have sliced the leather to reveal them. And he didn't like my shaved head. Andy and I went upstairs and I changed shoes. But when we get back down, I still have a shaved head and we've been giggling. Andy's face looked cheeky at the ticket box. He'd got the nervous giggles. Monster Man decided we were in trouble and punched him. And then he ran after us into the lift and beat the shit out of the two of us. One of his friends came and dragged me out of the lift by my shirt neck and up some stairs. Bump all the way, while Monster Man did the same to Andy. We got dumped into the street. The two of us were in bits. I lost it. We went back up to our rooms and I jumped all around the bedroom for an hour, threatening to go down and kill him. Poor Faulkner had to wait for me to fall asleep to make sure I didn't, piling chairs up at the door to keep Monster Man out and me in. There's a very good reason that God made the word touring rhyme with the word whoring. In fact, most of what I can remember about touring, especially in my younger days when I was doing huge US and European tours to support my albums, was it was nothing but sex. That's all any of us had on our minds. We did the gigs. It was a pleasant interlude between doing the gigs. While we weren't busy breaking hearts, myself and the other ladies in my band would often travel on the gentleman's crew bus. Crazy because you just don't do that in America, certainly not without your tour manager. All those buses rocked from side to side all down the highways. I guess we did end up breaking some hearts though, because most of the crew were married or had girlfriends and we wouldn't continue our relationships. At the end of the tour we dumped them like a bunch of hot snots, which was quite cruel because we did like them. It was foolish of them because we were just being sluts. As I said, we liked them. We did. They were nice guys. But they had girlfriends, and as we say in the music business, on tour doesn't count. That's the attitude we had. The tour I best remember was actually for my second album, I Do Not Want What I Haven't Got. At this stage, I had a new manager, Steve Farnoli, who had been Prince's manager. And because Nothing Compares to You on the album had been number one, it was suddenly a whole other world for me on tour. There was a stylist, lighting guys, there was a production, all kinds of pomp and ceremony. I found it hard to get used to because I had a lot of stage fright and I felt like a total imposter. I couldn't understand why anybody liked my songs or why anybody clapped or thought they were good. I really had no self-esteem when it came to songs or anything else. And I'd be playing these festivals or carnivals, and there'd be people screaming nearby on roller coasters, people screaming in terror, and I'd be singing soothing songs to the audience. It was just the weirdest thing, triggering actually. I also got into the habit of singing with my eyes closed, which really upset my manager. I came to prefer it for a number of reasons, including the fact that if you made eye contact with someone's boyfriend, you got scared his girl was going to beat you up afterwards, especially if you were doing a romantic song. Between the thrill ride screams and the fear of jealous rage, I developed the ability to just close my eyes while performing and go into my own world. Touring was ultimately a very lonely thing. There were a lot of people around me, people I loved even, but no one could see me, and I couldn't see myself reflected in anyone anymore. Suddenly there was no one around me who I'd known before I became very famous. I had cut myself off from my family. Not their fault, mine. I found the touring experience of sitting around in hotel rooms all day quite lonely. And the promo thing? I got in trouble every time I opened my mouth. People would ask me a question, I'd answer it, I'd be in trouble. I just couldn't be accepted as a good person. It was hurtful. Everybody was starting to treat me like I was a crazy person too. You're probably not aware of the fact that no matter whether you're the Queen of England or Barbra Streisand or Bob Dylan or anyone else, you may not take a shit on a tour bus. There will be a sign on the door that says no solids. This makes for very interesting touring. I would love to put together a toilet book, if you will, called No Solids. I would like to write to Mariah Carey and Barbra Streisand and even the Queen of England and get them to send me their stories. It would be especially funny if it was only very huge female stars like Celine Dion. My own stories about trying to take poops are not very funny. They're kind of disturbing, actually, so I'm not going to bother. Well, once I got stuck in a field in France, and I couldn't see anything past my face. I was on tour with Sly and Robbie, and the bus is so close to me I can't take a shit because I'm embarrassed. But then it won't come. And the next thing you know, I'm afraid they're all going to get out of the bus, so I can't take the shit, and I'm stuck there, literally. And eventually, somebody does get out of the bus, which makes me so scared that I take the shit. But I'm sure other people have funnier stories than me, because when you're on a tour bus with 14 people, the fact that nobody can take a shit on the bus means you got to stop 14 times at different times of the day or night. Good news, bad news, etc. While Faulkner spoke each word on the phone, "You've been nominated for a Grammy," I saw my life roll up, as if it were a blanket, and vanish, quick as a flash, like I was a dying person. I'd never told anyone. I'm like Stevie Nicks. She keeps her visions to herself. The nomination for Lion and the Cobra in 1989 was career-changing. Of course, my next nomination a couple years later for I Do Not Want What I Haven't Got brought me an inordinate amount of satisfaction on a different level. That's because it hadn't been so long before that Nigel called to say he didn't want to release that album. His exact words were, "It's too personal, it's like reading someone's diaries. It will end up like Terence Trent D'Arby's second album, Gathering Dust in a Warehouse." He'd been privy to the bloody songs for months before recording began, and the thing was already mastered. I wondered what on earth he was on. I think he just enjoyed being piggish. I reminded him that my contract gave me creative control, which meant the album was coming out whether he liked it or not. The man is such a moron. How can a song be too personal? I imagine slapping him lightly about the temples with a large raw fish. That's the only thing to do with stupid people. Within months, I Do Not Want What I Haven't Got is #1 all over the planet, and Nigel hasn't had to so much as lift a phone to make millions for himself. I'm pleased for him, because an idiot can never get laid if he isn't stinking rich. One of the factors contributing to my album's success began in a Paris cemetery. At Père Lachaise, a queen-size bed is carved in snow-white marble. There a young woman lies, wearing a beautiful buttoned nightdress, smiling at her baby, blankets pulled up around them, baby smiling back. Every detail, down to the stitches in the sheets and blankets, perfect. Every smile line under the woman's eyes, even her hair on her pillow. I walked around there most of the day in an extraordinarily expensive coat I wished I could keep. Jerry Stafford, the stylist, told me Père Lachaise even has its own sewage system. I must admit I was slightly freaked at the idea of the dead getting up to take a dump and then shuffling back into their tombs. Also, what do they wipe with? Note to self: never ever go to a graveyard again. We were making the video for Nothing Compares to You. We'd already shot most of the video in London a few days ago, maybe 3 setups. In one, a close-up, I just sang the song along with the track, sitting in a chair wearing a black polo neck. But in the part where it says, "All the flowers that you planted, Mama, in the backyard, all died when you went away," I cried for like 20 seconds. I think that means I wasted their time. I did manage to get my act together and keep singing, but I think it's unusable, so it's good we're shooting all this stuff in Paris. I feel bad I wasted everyone's time and money though. John Maybury, who again directed my video, thought I was crying because me and Faulkner had recently parted ways, but I'm happy about that now. It's better for everyone. I was crying about my mother being dead. I'm still really messed up about it, even though I'm 24. A little embarrassing, but there you go, I'm a girl. In the showbiz parts of Los Angeles, the white walls have beautiful dark pink flowers. The Mexicans live elsewhere, so do the African Americans. The only time you see those people, they're cleaning someone's house. In the New York office of my record company, the colour of the employees' skin is darkest in the basement, which is in the mail room. Their skin gets lighter as the floors go up, as do the stations the employees have their radios tuned to. 2 floors up from the top, no females becomes the scenario also, unless they're in secretarial roles. The bosses didn't like the album cover shot for The Lion and the Cobra, so we had to have a different one for America, but from the same series. They felt I looked angry on the European one. I look like I'm screaming. In fact, I was singing. The very clever photographer made me sing along to my record, which he had cranked up real loud, so it's just what I look like when I'm singing. But the bosses liked the demure look of the one where I'm looking at the floor and my mouth is shut. Apparently females seeming angry doesn't shift units, and they're already handicapped by my hair. The people who run the music industry aren't punk at all. They're a bunch of frightened people, but frightened of the wrong thing, namely music. Hence, in 1991, there was a rap category at the Grammys, but they didn't televise the award, so there was a boycott amongst the rap community. Hence, I once had Public Enemy's logo shaved and dyed onto the side of my head, so it would be seen on telly all around the world. Showbiz just got real interesting. The kids are beginning to revolt, and no one has been revolting since John Lennon died. Rap is the hugest thing in America. All you see are teenagers, referred to as kids by the establishment, sitting on steps with enormous boom boxes, blaring Public Enemy or KRS-One so loud that the bass would nearly make you defecate, or lugging the boom boxes around the streets on their shoulders like they're walking the Stations of the Cross. Similar to Christ's, rap's mission is self-esteem for those previously deemed shit. So it's as dangerous as Christ's, because a lot of kids of all manner are listening, and no one in the industry wants their top floors threatened by either the wrong skin colour or the wrong mindset, that is, anyone who cares about the truth. Kids are the market, but you have to keep them believing they're worth less than the stars, or they won't think they need what stars are selling. Wait till you see. When showbiz execs realise they can't kill rap, they will hijack it. They'll make millionaires of imposter rappers who say things like, "You can't be like me." Funny how time slips away. I actually attended the Grammys for the 1989 show when I'd been nominated for Best Female Rock Vocal, and I performed Mandinka. All through the dress rehearsal, I was anxious because the previous day, when we had arrived in LA, I had gone into one of those little houses on Sunset Boulevard that have a flashing sign in the window saying psychic. An ancient Indian woman, plump and wearing a purple and orange sari, emerged from behind a red curtain. "Sit down," she said to me, and pointed to a battered pale green armchair to her left. She went away for a few minutes, came back and plonked herself in its match opposite me. We chatted for about 10 minutes. Nothing in particular came up, other than I told her my mother was dead and that I wanted to know if she was okay wherever she was. She told me, "That's not what I do. You need a medium." And then she said, "Let me see your palm." And I gave her my right hand. She said, "I see dark spirits around you." Big gulp on my part. "Why are they there? How do I get rid of them?" "They are there because you are sad," she said. "You must have a bath and fill a plastic bottle with the water afterwards." And she continued, "For each of your years on earth, you must strap $100 bill to the bottle with elastic and give it to me. That is the cure." I ran back to the hotel and told Faulkner, "I need $2,000 ASAP. He wouldn't give it to me. He wouldn't ask the record company for it. He said I was being had, that the woman was a trickster. I could see he was right, but she'd scared me, so I plagued him all night and morning about it. I wanted to do it anyway. We were still annoyed with each other when it was time to go to the dress rehearsal. We were often annoyed with each other. We sat in the middle of the third row during